Hello guys, I'm Matt and welcome to a new episode of my animation analysis and breakdown series. The worldwide celebration for 2023 has finally started and the first two main LRs released are Blue Goku and Vegeta that fuse into Vegito Blue and a corrupted Fusion Zamasu. Today I'm going to analyze Vegito's animations, while in the next video I'm going to talk about Zamasu. I promise I will try to make this video not as long as the previous one. Before we start, I ask you guys to hit the like button and subscribe, as these videos take a long way to do and I put a lot of effort into them. If these videos won't go well, I will return to making my usual animations thread on Twitter. Enough talking though. Let's get started. One thing that is common to all of the Goku and Vegeta animations is how much I dislike their color palette. Their colors feel so bland and uninteresting, especially on the air. The third tone of shadow has no contrast at all, and in many shots you could not even notice it. This was an issue I found with the Resurrection of F Super Saiyan Blues as well, and I really hoped that they wouldn't repeat the same mistake. It makes no sense because for other Super Saiyan Blues, such as the 5th anniversary Vegito Blue and Trunks and Vegeta, they had such good palettes. Heck, Vegeta's palette in the Trunks and Vegeta card looks incredible and very well done. Why in the hell did they not use the same colors for this Goku and Vegeta card as well? I think I know the reason, unfortunately. When we first found out the LR was going to be a fusing Vegito, I instantly had one specific fear, that they would sacrifice the base animations in order for the transformed ones, Vegitos, to shine. And they did. Just like the 7th anniversary LRs, where especially on the Super Saiyan 4s, the base animations are trash, but then once you fuse into Gogeta, you have 3 of the best animations in the game, period. Okay, their animations aren't good, but how does this correlate to the palette? Well, in reality it does. They probably had a team of less experienced artists to work on these base form animations, while the other team with the best artists, now included, worked on the Vegito part. Disclaimer, no disrespect to the artists at all, I'm just analyzing the final product we got. I respect all the work of every single person who worked on these animations. This weaker team probably has less resources, less time and less budget. Hence why the palette is different from Trunks and Vegeta's super attacks, which were probably done by the stronger team, judging by how good and well animated they are. I still find it an odd choice, cause using a palette or another doesn't change anything in the production time, but whatever. We are not off to a good start because I think this is by far the worst animation of this unit, and maybe the worst of this whole year as well. It's so short and frankly not animated well. We start with Goku and Vegeta turning from a 3/4 shot to a side view. The animation in here is very stiff, as you can notice every single asset change. In addition, the quality of the assets themselves is quite bad as well. You can literally count the pixels on Goku, which makes this animation even worse. In the last part of this initial section, they use some twinning to try to make the movement more fluid, that while I think works well for Vegeta, especially on his small banks on the left, because you can see them shrinking and getting smaller, which adds realism to the animation. On Goku, they pretty much suck, lol. You can see with naked eye his front banks moving horizontally as a static PNG, which does not look good. After that we have a horrible part with Vegeta and Goku saying their respective lines. Apart from the fact that Vegeta's drawing looks somehow worse compared to the anime, especially the eyes, and the way their mouths move is terrible. The fact that they do not close their mouth even once makes them look like some drunk guy who has just left the club at 5 AM trying to speak. It's so bad, so bad. Also, the way they just stand there motionless makes the voice lines carry zero emotion and emphasis. This is something that you can notice specifically on Goku when he's shouting "let's charge together at full power", and he's just completely still with no movement at all. Lastly, we have both Saiyans getting ready to battle, and guess what? Another bad animation! The motion looks janky and there are like zero in-betweens. Also, Goku's movement in particular looks pretty bad due to the lack of consistency between his 3 poses. His hip bone goes from left to right to left again, which makes it look very bad when seen in motion. I have no idea why they did that. And one last thing, I think Vegeta's pose looks unnatural. I think it's either his left leg, which should be more spread out towards our right, or vice versa with his left leg. Overall, this animation was pretty bad and I don't think they should have done it at all. It adds nothing to the character and carries no pathos with it. Now, let's talk about the essays. Unfortunately, as said before, both this 12 key and the 18 key were sacrificed in order to put more time and effort into Vegito. Starting off, we have a nice looking start frame, which is the same as the one we see in their intro, but just flipped horizontally. I do like the shading on the clothes, but please do not focus on the top left part of the screen. You have done it, right? Did you notice it? Goku's hair goes beyond the aura. Yeah, very bad. Reminds me of Resurrection of F Blues base essay where Goku's aura isn't aligned to his body in some frames, and it was terrible. However, we have some well-drawn smear frames as Vegeta dashes towards the enemy together with some little movement before that. After the essay cutscene appears, we see both Goku and Vegeta dash towards the enemy. I think the aura here look fine, the shapes are well drawn, but what I don't like are the two character assets. They are just static PNGs moving on the screen, no movement on the arms nor on the legs. They are just kinda lame, but it's such a short segment that it isn't a big deal, to be honest. Then we have Vegeta punching the enemy with an animation taken straight out from his Niagara Pummel, which is the famous beatdown he did versus Goku Black. I don't know why they decided to use such a small section of it here, but it's alright, I guess. The transition between the two face assets is a bit jarring, but the rest is fine. I think it becomes worse with the next section, where the punches become just average low-budget Dokkan animation with the same effects they've been using for 3 years, and a small screen shake that doesn't add much impact to the blows. One nitpick I have is that the punch in the first scene starts by going downwards, and then in the sprite scene you can see that Vegeta's pose is just like he did a lateral swing instead of a downwards blow. Not really a fan of it since it is inconsistent, but I understand that I'm also doing a giant nitpick here. The second punch is even worse than the first, with little to no impact at all, but I do like the very next section in which Goku comes in very fast and takes action. I think visually it's cool to see the two of them trade places, even though the timing could be a little better, because Goku comes in very fast and then suddenly slows down by too much, which is in contrast to the first part. We then have another Dokkan sprite moment and nothing much to say here. After it we have finally a cut with some high quality assets. I like that they tried to make a transition between the sprites and the HD asset by aligning them on the screen, since they are similar poses in terms of angle and feature placement. Goku's kick isn't the greatest, but it isn't the worst either. It's the standard low frames movement with 4 or 5 assets in total. I think the smears help to make it look a bit better though. A great touch indeed. The transition between assets is okay, but in the end part, especially on the air, you can see quite a few rough changes. The section with the enemy flying from a building to another is cool, nothing much to say here, just that I dislike these smoke assets not having more than 1 or 2 frames and looking at PNG being just scaled up. But as with the dash scene I talked about earlier, it's a short segment, so it's not that big of a deal. It's bad, but thankfully you don't see it too much. The next cut is Vegeta dragging the enemy further into one of the building with a kick, and this is basically one-to-one with how it was in the anime. Quite well done, even though I think Vegeta's face in the anime looked better. The rest in Dokkan is very well done and communicated in a better visual way his rage thanks to the sharp shapes of his face features and his mouth in particular. I really like how in Dokkan they've used the building's rocks and debris as a sort of overlay to put on top of Vegeta. It's such a cool addition. I have a problem with what comes next. Vegeta pushes the enemy out of the building and we see Goku getting ready to slam him into the ground. Now, from what we see here, the camera is put vertically on the Z-axis above both of them and is pointing downwards on a straight line. We can clearly see Goku's face and torso, so that means he's giving his back to the ground. Also, given his current position, we can see that there are no buildings behind him, only on his left and right. We then have a close-up of Goku with some cool smear and a little motion blur added to both of his arms. Good assets, got nothing to say here. We see Goku standing vertically on the Z-axis with his back facing another building. What the fuck? I know this may sound a giant nitpick and a useless complaint, but I noticed this inconsistency right away the first time I saw the animations during the Dokkan Now at 4 AM my time. Between one scene and the other, Goku rotated by 90 degrees on both his Z and Y axis. It's an issue I can't unsee, and even though I know that most people will probably not even notice it, I dislike it a lot. The next and last scene isn't the greatest either, with Vegeta rushing towards towards where the enemy landed, causing an explosion with some rocks, wind, smoke and visual effects on the screen. This was an obvious reference to the Niagara Pummel, and I have no idea why they decided to not use the whole scene. To be fair, I have an idea, and that is that they needed to save the budget for some other animations, but still, it was such a missed opportunity. I don't think this last part does its finisher job well, honestly, on top of the blue effects having some weird timing, which makes them look not fluid at all. Overall, I think this 12 key wasn't a complete mess, but it was certainly not good. It was kinda bad, to be honest. I think the 18 key, obviously, looks so much better. However, I still consider this to be a pretty low key compared to the other prefused 18 keys we already have in the game. The starting shot is pretty cool. We have Goku and Vegeta turning on the aura and getting ready to battle. I think the movement is okayish, only 3 frames is for sure pretty rough, but it's so fast that your eye can't even process it before they activate the aura. The impact frames look nice, but they are a light version of how they were done in the original scene and also used in Trunks and Vegeta's intro. Another case of them yet again having to save their budget. The air movement is also the classic rotation from left to right that Dokkan always does when they don't want or can't draw other frames for an actual animation. After the SA cut-in, we have Goku and Vegeta dashing towards the camera, with the reference of this scene being animated by Naoki Tate in the original anime episode. You can see traces of his style on the aura in particular, with the simpler yet dynamic shapes. A cool thing they did here is that they used the mid-episode screen caps. I was hoping that they would include it in this card, whether as the actual artwork or as an SA asset, and I'm pretty happy that they did. I also think that in motion, the big change in regards to the aura shapes is fine due to it happening when the character assets come closer to the camera and switch to the screen caps ones. In this way, the change isn't too sudden to our eyes and is sort of masked thanks to the timing of the movement. I like the fast movement on the air as well, since they are dashing and are enveloped in the aura. It makes sense for it to be that fast, even though it's again the standard left to right rotation looped again and again. However, after this comes an animation choice that I'm not able to understand. I've tried my best to understand why they did this, but I couldn't find an answer. They literally and fully change Goku's positioning by putting him from right to left part of the screen and flip him horizontally. Why? Why couldn't they leave him like he was 1 frame before and make him punch the enemy with the left hand regardless? What was the point of putting him on the left and flipping him completely? It's not even that this would have caused an inconsistency with what comes next, because as I said, they could have just made him punch from the exact same position he had prior to the switch. I think this is a big issue because it's such a rugged and big change that occurs in one single frame that it ruins the flow of the whole animation. Sure, the smear and motion blur on the fist as it comes closer to the camera are good, but man, they ruined this part, to be honest. To add to that, I also think the last punch asset is a bit slow and stays on the screen for too long. You can't have an asset with such smears stay on screen for more than a couple of frames at maximum, and here it stays for about 12 frames. Like, The next part is quite mid. The 2 punches done by Goku and Vegeta don't feel impactful, the effects are too fast and they stay on screen for very little time, which makes them look stiff. However, I like what comes next. Vegeta's kick is quite good thanks to his dynamic and exaggerated poses. I also like the camera angle that occurs here. Showing both of the Super Saiyan Blues from a side view helps to better see Vegeta's poses, which I think look very nice. And well, seeing them working together is always nice as well. We then have something that was already shown in the premium movie a few days before the character's kit and animations were revealed, and if you follow me on Twitter, you will know my first impression wasn't the greatest. I think from a drawing perspective, Goku looks okay at least. Let's say that he stands somewhere in the middle of a low quality sprite and a high quality asset. The creation of the key sphere isn't the greatest either. You can notice that there are only 3 keyframes with no in-betweens at all, and while it looks fine in 2x speed, we are analyzing them in 1x speed, so unfortunately that's a malus. One positive thing though is that for the very last keyframe they did draw some new assets for both clothes and hair, which means that they didn't do the classic left to right rotation I've been mentioning so many times, which is a big win indeed. Then we have Vegeta charging up his beam attack as well, and this is one of the instances in which the problem I have with their hair palette shines the most. Look at his hair and tell me it's not hard to see the third tone shading, come on. Going back to the actual animation, I think this one looks a bit better than Goku, outside of those awful low quality and super pixelated scaled up assets, thanks to the little detail of Vegeta's arms going back and forth when creating the final flash sphere, a nice addition which adds more life to the moment for sure. An issue I have with both scenes though is that the palettes change way too quickly, from aura ones to aura plus Kiblas. I think they should have slowed them down a bit. We then have both of them shooting their respective beams towards the enemy. Goku's part isn't the most fluid I've ever seen. The transition between his charge pose and the fire pose is just a single full screen white frame, which isn't the greatest. And in my opinion, they should have made Goku's arms and body stretched towards the camera before doing the transition, just like they did with all the various Movie 10 Kamehameha references they've done in the past years. The shot with Goku inside the blast is very nice. They again drew some new assets for both clothes and air, and the great speed at which they change is accurate to the fact that he has just fired one of his most powerful attacks. Vegeta's firing is certainly simpler than Goku's, but I think that helps his section to be animated better as a result, since the zoom out from the high close-up to the firing pose is easier to do than the whole change they did for Goku. I also quite like Vegeta's pose here, since they are just floating in the air. I think it's a very nice one. It's almost like he was in the water instead, if you get what I mean. And after these two scenes, we have a beautiful camera angle of both beams hitting the enemy, with a good amount of well-drawn effects that change colors based on which side they are. And one little detail that I didn't notice the first time I saw this section is that they added some under effects on Vegeta's final flash to make it stand out more from Goku's classic beam. It's a very cool touch indeed. We then transition to the classic beam power up scream scene with a very cool shot that shows both of them at the same time on the screen thanks to a diagonal line in the middle. I love when they do stuff like this instead of playing one scene after the other. It gives more the feeling that they are working together at the same time. The animation here is fine. Goku's face looks a bit funny at the end, but that's just how it was in the original anime episode, so I can't really blame them for that. And now we have probably the coolest and most creative scene of these animations, the base ones, the two beams fusing together. I love the concept behind this. It's a nice way to incorporate the final Kamehameha into the card without having Vegito use it, and I also love that they used the same texture and design as the Gallic Kamehameha from Dragon Ball Super Broly, showing again that they pay a lot of attention to details. But while I think the concept is very good, the execution isn't the greatest. Sure, as I said, the fused beam looks fine, but the rest doesn't, unfortunately. I like that they reference the same beam style as when Goku powers up his Kamehameha against Fusion Zamasu, but in my opinion they shouldn't have left the two beams separated like that. They should have made them fuse as a whole. The result is that you see these two ovals that converge in not a precise way into this big organic and very complex shape, which looks kinda off. Not to mention that the fused beams assets sometimes appear behind the single beams, which further takes away from the realism of this animation. The ending shot is another very good concept, but poorly executed, unfortunately. I can't express how much I love the idea of the camera almost representing a guy far away in the distance from where the battle takes place, seeing all those lightning effects shooting in the sky with all of those intense lights and colors. And you can even see the smoke and wind coming right at the camera as the effects get even crazier, which probably happens in the same moment Goku and Vegeta power up their beams. It's such an insanely cool idea, and this is by far the best part of these three animations I've talked about until now. However, while the lightning, the effects and the colors look amazing, what gives it away are the last wind assets. They are so junky and they stay on the screen for so long that they feel like some low budget animation from a beginner kid at school. Like, why did they make them look like that? It makes no sense and it's such a stupid mistake. They have this animation of 3 different assets play, flip itself horizontally and then replay from the start with awful timing. The last asset stays on screen for 10 frames. 10! Usually FX assets stay for no more than 3 or 4 frames because they are supposed to feel alive and dynamic and fast, especially something like the wind, which is constantly moving and changing. This ruins the animation so much for me because it looks very rushed and not polished at all, which is a shame considering the original idea they had. So yeah, I do not like this base animation at all. They were obviously sacrificed to put more work into Vegito's animations, which I guess it's fine only if all of the transformed animations are good, which unfortunately it's not the case here. While for both of the 7th anniversary LRs the transformed animations made up for the low quality ones of their base forms, Blue Vegito doesn't nullify his base animations, but more on that later. Now let's start to talk about the Vegito portion of the card. I won't have as much to say as I had with Goku and Vegeta, since I think he has many less flaws than them, so hopefully this video won't turn out to be too long. One thing that I really hoped before seeing the animations is that they kept the same artistic style as the 5th anniversary Vegito Blue. His shading, the dynamic line weight on his hair, gloves and muscles, the very sharp and blocky hair, I love with all my being those design choices. Thankfully, not only did they keep them, but they've also merged them with Hinao's stylistic traits, and the result, oh my god, is outstanding. Vegito has never looked this good in Dokkan. I think I won't spend too much time talking about this animation. It's essentially flawless, very simple yet effective in its execution, and stays faithful to the source material while also putting a nice touch of creativity and original stuff on it. The part where Goku hands Vegeta the Potara is very well done, very nice timing that encapsulates well the sudden motion of Goku's arm. My only minor nitpick is his left forearm moves 2 times, it twitches towards a lower position, which is probably a result of them looping the same motion and not remembering to cancel the keyframe with that asset. Not a big deal regardless. Everything else is pretty much perfect. Vegeta's face is very on model, the movement of his facial features is fluid and well paced. Goku's smirk to encourage him, and Vegeta agreeing to fuse both look amazing and well animated. The next part is also well done with good shading and effects. Maybe the transition between the assets where they are standing still and the first ones of the fusion motion could have used 1 or 2 more in-betweens because the change is quite rough. Vegito's backshot is very well done with the black shading at the start slowly turning down its opacity to reveal Vegito in all of his glory. The blue light slowly disappearing from his body on top of the usual Potara glow effect are also quite good. And his transformation to blue is very cool, the top view angle is an original take to it, and I think the drawings make it justice. I only have 2 issues with this part. One, I can't really understand if Vegito is flying or not. When he's in base, he looks like he isn't, because you can see that his left foot isn't touching the ground, but when he turns blue, it kinda looks like he does. I don't know honestly. I find it a bit strange, but it may as well just be me. Let me know what you think in the comments. And 2, they decided to include the enemy sprites in there, which is for sure an interesting take and something that we don't see that often. However, due to how sprites work in Dokkan, when you have a big sized character or a character with aura on his sprites, they turn out to cover Vegito's transformation and you can't actually see him well, which is very unfortunate and, to be honest, an error on their part. Everything else I don't have anything to say about. Voice acting, drawings, effects, shading, pacing, everything is masterfully done. The shot where he's screaming is so cool, with the giant aura in the background, really shows how powerful he is. Outside of a few small mistakes, very well done animation, and oh my god, it's OST. It's amazing. Okay, here we are finally. This is the animation I have most problems with, and that I dislike most. Not because it's the worst one, but because it's just done wrong. It has so many beginner-like mistakes and decisions that make no sense at all. The very start is honestly well done. They gave Vegito a small 3D rotation of his body with a cool camera angle and perspective, and oh my god, look at those folds on the pants. He now never misses. When I was watching the Dokkan now and saw these few seconds, I thought, oh, we are off to a good start, let's go. But then these thoughts were shattered instantly. The next scene is likely one of the worst cuts we've ever seen for a main part of a Dokkan Festival LR. Who the fuck thought that this was even remotely fine? It's awful. They have a solid still PNG sliding from left to right with no skeletal movement and just a bunch of mediocre speed lines. Then Vegito touches, because I refuse to refer to that as a hit, the enemy, and what happens? Nothing. No effects, no smears, no impact, just some bubbles of spit and a little screen shake. Now, I don't want to sound rude or disrespect in any way the animators that worked on this, because I'm sure that if they could have, they would surely have done much better than this. But apparently they didn't have time or enough resources, I don't know. But this looks like something straight out of 7 Deadly Sins Season 3. Remember the kick Meliodas does when fighting Escanor? Yeah, pretty bad, right? Well, this one is almost exactly the same, except that thank God they at least added some screen shake to it, just a little. And well, if you didn't notice, I hate this part with every cell of my being. What comes next is fine, I guess. The idea of Vegito hitting the enemy with a kick and then doing a follow-up is something that Dragon Ball Z Kakarot used very often in his iteration of Vegito, so it's a cool thing that they tried to reference that. But even this second kick is pretty mid, pushes the enemy with not much impact and force, but inexplicably the enemy flies away at enormous speed as he was just hit by a truck at 2000 kilometers per hour. In the next scene as well, you can see the sprite flying across the whole screen in just a few frames, which is inconsistent with how much visual force they put into that second kick. And what comes after isn't as bad, thankfully. I liked the decision to make Vegito use only one leg with his arms crossed. It represents well his cockiness and self-confidence. And from a drawing perspective, I have to say I'm not the biggest fan of them, mainly because while they are well drawn, at the same time they look like some low quality sprites as well. Like, you can notice the style is different, but you can also notice that they are clearly different from the assets we saw in the cut before them. We then have a beautiful kick taken from Vegito's introduction in Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. I have nothing bad to say here. The drawings, asset changes and animation itself are well done. The kick is impactful even without many visual effects applied to it. In fact, they only use some wind ones, thanks to its good anticipation and timing. Unfortunately, after it comes the second worst animated part of this essay. This side shot of Vegito landing multiple consecutive fast kicks to the enemy. I like the concept behind this section. Vegito is kicking him so fast that he's building up kinetic energy and ki as well, I suppose, that he's later gonna throw at the enemy. However, the problem here is the execution. Let's start from the transition between the previous pose and this one, which is very rough. In just one frame, Vegito goes from a preparation pose to his kick having already hit the enemy and the electricity already appeared around his leg. On top of the background zooming in for no reason at all and already having motion blur when they have yet to start moving. We then have a looped animation of, as I was saying, Vegito kicking the enemy as he builds up more and more energy, and the glow on his foot increases with each hit. This is quite poorly done, as the only moving part of his body is his leg. Every other limb doesn't move in the slightest, and even the leg movement isn't that well done, with basically having 3 main positions that loop infinitely without any dramatic changes. Also, the movement of the 2 characters is only told by the blurred background. If that wasn't there, you couldn't tell they were moving, which is a big issue I have with this animation. To top all of that, the choice to use this camera angle makes honestly no sense to me. It makes a good concept look like a low budget animation from an arcade game of early 2000, so Yeah, pretty bad part and something I was honestly not expecting to see in a character of this level. And it doesn't get better with the next cut. While the drawing is quite well done and it's probably now at its fullest with those super rounded shapes, dynamic line weight on the line art and good depth thanks to the shading, the animation is once again poorly executed. And this is one of the things I'm most disappointed about, because it's a dumb mistake that could be fixed in, I'm not joking, roughly a few seconds. But what is this mistake? It's this super rough jump in sides that happens in one single frame. Now, to give you a small lesson of how these types of animation work, in Adobe Animate or Flash, there is a thing called symbol. Using the official site, a symbol is a graphic, button or movie clip that you create once in the Animate authoring environment, or by using the simple button ActionScript 3.0 and movie clip classes. A graphic symbol is a collection of frames used in animations or single frame mode. As the definition of the official site says, a graphic symbol is a collection of frames used in animations. Why is this important? Because it's one of the most helpful features for Dokkan Battle styled animations. To explain its use, I will use the assets of the Kakarot's kick from the 12 key. As you can see, I've already imported everything I need into my library. Now I'm going to create a new symbol and set it to graphic. Once I'm done with that, I will put all the assets inside the symbol and not in the main timeline. After a few alignment and timing adjustments, we have our kick animation fully ready. But, as I said, this specific animation isn't present in the timeline yet, only inside the symbol. Now let's put the symbol in the timeline and see what happens. We can see the kick animation, right? But what happens if I try to twin the symbol and make it go from left to right? Won't it impact my kick animation as well? No, and that's the power of symbols. They are essentially a container for your scenes. Every animation you apply to the symbol will be applied to what's inside as well, without modifying it. But why did I tell you all this? Because this is one of the first rules of Dokkan styled animations and sprite animation in general. As you can see, Vegito's facial features move together with his head, which means that the whole head is our graphic symbol and its features are the single layers placed inside. And you can also see the same thing happening with his body. As I've just told you, we can twin graphic symbols freely. So let's try to make the head gradually increase in size. And same thing with the body. And we will use the sudden size increase frame as our reference for the end pose. Let's make it a keyframe, apply some classic twin, and voila! We fixed Vegito's movement in roughly 15 seconds. Do you see how much better it looks now? No rough changes, but instead his face and body grow in size gradually. And this is why I dislike it as much as I do. It was such an easy fix for a stupid mistake. And well, it doesn't get better after this. On top of having these few frames in which Vegito's body looks gigantic compared to his head, the transition to the next pose is also quite rough as well, with no in-betweens at all. And we then have Vegito kicking the key ball in the face of the enemy, which I have to say is a neat concept and looks pretty much like an Isatsu technique from Captain Tsubasa or Inazuma 11. The idea of him building kinetic energy and then releasing it as a key sphere was definitely interesting, and I think this shoot scene is well done with some cool energy effects flying together with the key. I wish they stopped using 2017 smoke assets though, please. Vegito then begins to charge the final flash, and when I first saw this I was fairly surprised because we've never seen Vegito do that move before, and I think that's exactly why they choose to use it. Him bringing his arms together is alright, nothing too special, and I wish they made his leg, hair and Potara move a bit because his pose feels very static. The effects are well done, almost one-to-one with the first final flash from Dragon Ball Z. Again, I wish they made at least his hair move a bit, or that they added some dynamic shading, but unfortunately they didn't. Even though I have to say, they have some kind of tendency to treat the Super Saiyan Blue air as kind of static. They don't usually make it move too much, and this happened quite often in almost each Super Saiyan Blue iteration they did. Thankfully, It's almost like they listened to me and added dynamic shading in the very next scene, so thank you Dokkan. And the fire off is honestly quite bland, no impact frames or transition from the key charging to the beam whatsoever, the air doesn't move again, and when the beam makes contact with the enemy you feel zero impact. They didn't even add some screen shaking there, an odd decision, but what can you do about it? At least the light coming from the beam that envelops the whole screen and changes Vegito's color palette, making his lighter tone white and the darker tones go towards much more contrasting colors is a very cool touch, and I definitely like that. Overall, not a fan of this 12 key, especially after looking at Super Saiyan 4 Gojitas, Super Saiyan Gokus, or even the 8th anniversary LRs. Sure, their 12 keys are often their most powerless animation, not for Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. His 12 key is one of the best super attack animations ever, but they aren't usually that bad. Sure, they have some mistakes here and there, but overall they aren't underwhelming by any means. But this one is underwhelming. The idea behind it was cool, yeah, but the way they decided to do it is honestly disappointing. They had so many references left to use from the future saga, and they choose for some reason to not care about them. Like, wasn't Shida's grab into the ground the perfect scene to be followed up by the final flash? Or if they wanted to keep the Hisatsu concept, couldn't they do the same thing but with Shida's consecutive kicks? I mean, it would have looked so much better in my opinion, but unfortunately they sacrificed not only the base animations but this one as well. But it wasn't for nothing, because guys, this next animation, his 18 key, his ultra super attack, is by far best looking super attack animation ever done in Dokkan Battle, the Vegito Special.
見せてやるぜ俺たち人間の力をなきれいさっぱり消えちまえ
When I first saw this, my jaw dropped to the ground. It wasn't the first time that Dokkan came up with some original animations for his characters. In fact, at this point, they were already differentiating themselves from the original source materials for a whole year, but this was the first time they came up with a completely never before seen concept, storyboards, attacks and animations. I honestly don't have many things to analyze here. I think this whole animation is one of the closest pieces of Dokkan media to the definition of perfection that we have ever seen. From the incredibly cool concept of him creating two spheres of ki with autonomous movements to assist him as he slashes his opponent with two spirit swords, to the super high speed paced animation of him beating the hell out of the enemy sprites with a first person POV coupled with insanely well drawn effects, smears and even the keyboards moving in the background as Vegito is destroying the enemy, which has our same point of view. I love how consistently in the whole animation every single effect shape resembles Naotoshi Shida's style. Since this animation is paced to such a high speed, his was the perfect and right style to emulate, since his animations are always super fast and dynamic as well. He then proceeds to do a big hit slash, launching the enemy far away as he commands the two spheres to follow him. The pose is the same as his artwork, cool detail, which then proceed to explode, creating a big smoke cloud and some wind pressure, which Vegito literally cuts in half as he dashes towards the enemy to continue the slaughter. It was so cool. I particularly loved this detail of Vegito's body impacting with the wind shockwave and modifying his shape. It really makes you feel his massive force and presence. We then have the beautiful final slash with well drawn effects shapes, a perfect close-up of Vegito smiling because he knows he's a Chad, as the Shida-esque smoke with the glow of the key spheres still on it slowly dissipates. Such an incredible shot, man. And now comes the final and, to be honest, coolest part of the animation. He converts both spirit swords into pure energy and shoots it in the face of his opponent, creating a powerful blast which has the same shape of a giant spirit sword. It's such a creative and outstanding detail that I didn't notice the first time I saw this animation, and again, the shape of both beam and effects are all taken from Naotoshi Shida's style, and in fact they look insanely cool. This whole animation was a 10 out of 10 by Dokkan, even though it isn't fully Dokkan original, because as you're seeing on the screen, some parts were referenced by various source material already existing, but the way they put everything together is simply perfect. They did a masterpiece with this animation in particular, but I do not like the idea of sacrificing 4 other animations in order to make 1 or 2 shine. I would much prefer for everything to be as consistent as possible, or at least sacrifice just the base part, not Vegito's 12 key as well. I hope that if they continue to make more Dokkan originals in the future, they will put a bit more care into some of the other animations as well. Finally, we are almost at the end, and thankfully this active skill as well is very good, so I won't have to talk about it too much. I have just a few nitpicks here and there, but overall I have to say they did a pretty good job. My first issue is the following. The animation starts with Vegito enveloped in his aura, watching the enemy from the sky. He then proceeds to punch and kick the enemy with no aura, and then he reactivates his aura with the iconic Yosha pose. Now, why did they make him start with the aura if he deactivated it after half a second and then reactivated it after another second? Couldn't they just make the first shot the same but without the aura? Why does he need to do on, off, on in such a short time span? I know that I'm nitpicking, but this is something that I personally put a lot of thought into for my own animations, because I want that what happens in the animation makes sense from a chronological and logical standpoint. And I do not understand their decision here. I guess they just didn't think about it, but still. I'm also not a fan of the drawings of the Yosha section. I feel like they look kinda off-model compared to the others, especially the first pose and the last one. On top of the aura shading looking quite funny, with Vegito's bicep looking like an emerald that I would trade for a Sharpness 5 book to a villager in Minecraft. And I know that they wanted to stay true to the original panel in the manga, but if you compare it to every other drawing, you can instantly notice the difference, especially on the hair and face. But after it, comes just Inao at his greatest. Immaculate drawings, fluid animation, perfect shading and depth, incredible colors, and I don't know what else to say. It's perfect. He really gave his all for this section, and you can clearly see it. Coupled with the Goku and Vegeta reference from Fighters, bro. Insanely well done scene. I have nothing more to say than that. I also like everything that comes after it. I would have just wished for the tiny Vegito sprite to move a bit after launching Zamasu away, instead of standing there with no movement at all. It's true that it's so small that almost everyone won't even notice it, but I think they should have added a bit of movement regardless. The last scene is also well done. Maybe just the final smoke asset should have had 1 or 2 more frames animated, instead of making it a stiff PNG, increasing its size at the very end. But again, it's very short and it's just me nitpicking. However, I do not like the chaos screen. Yeah, I know. Sorry. The first part with his eyes going back to normal and then the smile, fine. But I'm not a fan of the cropped zoom out, which looks something you would do in any editing program during post-production. And Vegito's pose as well, while having a cool angle and perspective, I think looks static due to the fact that they didn't animate it outside of his expression change. And sure, it's nice to have a chaos screen, but I've seen them do much better than this. It's okay, but it's certainly not the best. And with that, we have finally come to an end. Overall, I have to say that I'm unfortunately not very satisfied with the card as a whole. Sure, the last 2 animations are very good, but I can't ignore the fact that the others are quite underwhelming. As I said, I could have accepted the base form being sacrificed, but even Vegito's 12 key looking that bad? Nah bro, nah. I get that they wanted to do a pretty much full Dokkan original, but I mean, you have a lot of source material left from the anime, and use it. They didn't even give him a counter or a nullify with the spirit stab, or when he crushes Zamasu's sphere with his bare hand. I don't know, it almost feels incomplete. Sure, if we take into consideration only the Vegito special, it's probably on the top 5 or even top 3 of Dokkan best animations ever. But if we consider the whole card, as I usually do when I have to rank them, then the other animation hurt him, and not by a small amount. Last but not least, this Vegito is a big win for me personally. They stole almost nothing from mine, so you guys will see exclusive and 100% different animations for him. But for now, I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.